Hello everyone, and welcome to this session tutorial on Adobe Analytics API, and more specifically on the Adobe Analytics API 2.0. As you can see here, we will cover in this video a brief overview of what the Adobe Analytics API is capable of, what it will most probably be in the future. I'm not the product manager, so I cannot do any promise, but I'm pretty sure some of the functionality I will discuss will come at some point in this API. And we will see quickly and briefly the way to actually create the request for analytics reporting directly in the Adobe Analytics workspace. So first of all, I wanted to say that the Adobe Analytics API 2.0 is called 2.0 because the previous one was the 1.4 API. So there have been quite a bit of API before this one, and this one is completely new. I would say it's not a new iteration. That's why they changed the number. There was the 1.3 previously, then the 1.4. And now the 2.0 is completely new system that is being set up. So there is a huge step to move from one to the other. And the biggest step that is ongoing for this API is the authentication, as you need now, as we have seen in the previous video, to go to the console.adobe.io. And this will enable you to create your different project and create your different API connector. The Adobe, it's good to notice that the Adobe Analytics API 1.4 is not currently deprecated, so it's still being used. I would not recommend to base most of your new application on that one, because obviously it will be deprecated at some point and everything will be replaced by the 2.0. However, there are a lot of endpoints, a lot more than there is right now at the 2.0 API. And the reporting system was quite different as well. You can see the different elements. So now I am in the 1.4 API documentation that is still online and you can still access. And they have been, as you can imagine, so each of those methods are different endpoints that you could request and retrieve elements for. And not all of these have been migrated as of today, so as the 16th of July 2020. And I'm pretty sure most of it will be moved, and some will be even improved, and that's the thing. With the 2.0, you will be the old stuff and the new one as well, so it's definitely the way to go forward. Still, some elements are not there, especially if you want to use the admin. And you can see, actually, it's quite funny if it's still on now. But if you go to report suite now, you can still see, or you could still see, if it's not available anymore, that they are using in the background the 1.3 endpoint. So you can see that not everything has been migrated, and this specific element to manage the report suite and everything is not there yet. But for reporting purposes, it will most likely be the new way, especially because the old one, those different methods that you are seeing here, get queue, get queue and run, and so on, they were based for the reporting. The reporting was quite easy to get, so you were creating a statement, you send that to Adobe Analytics, and the problems start there as you were sending that statement saying, oh, I need this request, and then there was this request was being received by Adobe and being processed, and then you had to check the queue by the get queue to actually know the state of your request, and when the request was actually ready, you could get that request back. So that was quite problematic, because you could never know how long the request will take to process the data, and therefore your API connection ran quite errantly. So I used to have a Adobe Analytics API 1.4 Python wrapper, and it was checking every 30 minutes for the result. Was it there? Was it not there? You never know. And you had to check regularly. So this has completely changed now, and you will need to do a different type of request now. And the requests now today are based on workspace. I guess now everyone is familiar with workspace. It's a new way of dealing with requests, and this has some implication that we will see. There are other elements that are being referenced in the 1.4 API that are not available as of yet. And one is the data warehouse report and the real-time report. I'm not sure if this real-time report will ever come as a very different thing in the 2.0 because the underlying technology is still the same. And one of the elements that is available, and I think it's not being seen here, is the data insertion API. So the data insertion API is used to be actually within the, let me try to find it. It used to be a reference, oh, here it is. You can see, you can directly see it in the documentation. Being documented data sources as well. They've been documented in the 1.4 API. Actually, it's not exactly a 1.4 API. It's you send the request directly through Adobe Analytics, so to the server. So it's not really connected to the system of the reporting that we think. So you can still use it in the new version, and we will see that I've ported some of the elements, but obviously, as I said, there are going to be move forward the old stuff, but I have new stuff, and the new stuff is quite interesting and will probably be an interest of you, and it's almost there. So we'll cover that briefly. So that was a bit of history of the 1.4 API, what it was capable of, what are the things that are coming or not, from my perspective and what I think it will come. Then if we dip down into the 2.0, if we go deep down into the 2.0 API, we can see that obviously there is a section of the JWT how to actually create your API key and your token. And there are some very interesting Swagger UI that we will see. And there is this reporting API guide. The reporting API guide is quite interesting, and but the most important elements are basically coming here. Your API, if you use the 2.0, it's completely different from the 1.4 again. I need to say that is that there is a timeout from Adobe I/O, and it's 60 seconds. So you cannot, if your request run more than 60 seconds, there is a timeout being generated, and that is very different again, because I told you before, you could request the element, and it took time to come and download, and it was very very erratic in terms of response. And now you know that there is basically a SLA stating that nothing could or nothing should take more than 60 seconds. It can still actually be, but in that case you need to optimize your request and so on. And there is a rate limiting. Rate limits, I don't know how to say that. And this element is very, very important if you actually try to create a reporting. This is this state that you can not have more than 120 requests per minute, and this is enforced for every 6 seconds. You cannot have more than 12 requests. So you cannot do, okay, I try to do 100 requests in the 10 seconds and then 20 in the 50 seconds remaining. This is not possible. You will get an error, the 429 HTTP response code telling you that there is you are going too much, so there is too many requests going on. And this is very important. People tend to use the 1.4 API to do a massive reporting, and this is not very well suited for the new Adobe Analytics API right now for the 2.0. I would not recommend going through the new API if you want to do massive reporting. This is not the use case that this API is built for. The API is built for you to do more interactive requests if you want fast response for some element that you need in near real time. So that being said, we can quickly go to the reporting where they explain you to the best practice. Then you need to follow. So as I was explaining, you need to make, or as it was implied, you need to make multiple and smaller requests instead of large and single requests. So it starts to get problematic with the massive reporting. Please cache the request instead of re-request again, or request the data again on in next 5 minutes. Do not pull for new data faster than a 30-minute interval. Those are best practices, and pull historical data and recurrent it regularly instead of requesting again the entire data set. It kind of makes sense with the caching again. And those are best practices. You are not obliged to follow them. However, you will not experience the best usage of the API if you do not follow those. Actually, it's not enforced, but the design and the way the API work make you follow them. It's not something. I'm not the product manager, so it's definitely some side have been taken there. Not something I would have chosen, but it's there. It's doing a great job at doing what it's supposed to do, but it makes you, if you want to use the API not the way it's intended to, it's not a very great user experience. So be mindful of that. Then there is this example of request, and you can see the requests are quite makes sense, but when more bigger you create them, and longer it takes, and it start to make you realize what workspace is all about, because the 2.0 API and Adobe Analytics API is actually based on workspace interface, as I was stating before. And it's exactly now Adobe is more and more doing API first approach. So they are building the API and then they're building the UI on top. It's much more flexible that way, and you now understand better why your workspace report. If you follow that tutorial, you will understand better why the API takes, or why the workspace takes so long to load. You can see that for every request, you have the report suite ID that you need to set there. And then you have global filters. And if we go into workspace again, for some reason I've been logged out. If we go to workspace again, we can see where the global filter is. And if you make your header on that, it actually make the request, the creation of the request, quite intuitive. That being said, it's a lot of iterative process that you probably need a very good programming skills to really scale that up. So I'm going to create a new blank project. And now I guess everyone is familiar with the Adobe Workspace, but here you can see that I'm in that panel. I'm adding this report suite ID. So that analysis is my website, and now I can actually report suite ID. And the global filter is actually here. So everything that you put here is the global filter. And you always, or at least I always thought that the date range was something different because it's on the other side. But actually, when you read the reporting, you actually see that the date range is actually a global filter that is being put here. So it's exactly the same. Then you have the metric container, and you have the dimension. So the metric container is an object that contains a metric first, so it's the number of metric that you're going to put, and the metric filter. So each metric can be assigned with one filter, and that behavior can be showcased here if I put visit here, so the metric here, And you can actually have a filter on top, and this is your metric filter. And that being done, you will have this view actually one metric. So here it's metric page views, and here it's another data rank that is being put on top of the metric filter. Dimension, and it's important to know that dimension is not an array, it's just an object, and or like a string. So you basically put a string, and that starts to make you think. If you used to use the Adobe 1.4 API, you could use a list of elements that you put there. But now you can only put one element, so we can put month, it will be only one. You can only put one element. And you may start to think, oh, actually, I would like to correlate that with other things, yeah, like it is in Workspace. In Workspace, you have month, and you could take a page, and then you basically break down like this, and I say, yeah, I want to have this report. So for every month, the top 5 pages, and I can expand that time frame, and there it will be. So I would like to have this report. So this report, when it's being built, is actually giving you different calls to the API. So there is this global call for the API, so June and July, and then there is a call for getting the page out of June and the page out of July. So how you actually create your breakdown is basically calling first the element that you want to break down by. You get those elements ID, and then do other requests behind it. So it's not in one request possible to get all of the elements. You need to do another request for getting those elements, filter by that month or that dimension here, it's a month, and then another request for getting the page again by the other dimension. So here the month July. So this is why you can only request one dimension per request. Then you can set the settings, sorting or not, and you can do that. So there is some example response. So you can see the response are not that easy anymore. It used to be quite easy to read. You have the summary data. So here, summary total, you can again get here, and sorry, and you have for each row an element and an item ID. So the item ID is the element you will require to do a breakdown. So you will say, I want to have now the dimension for my example. Imagine this is item ID 1 and this is item ID 2. I want to have a page dimension. The metric is visit. The metric filter is this segment, and the other metric filter will be item ID page, item ID 1. Oh, sorry, months, item ID 1. And here it will be the same. The metric filter will be the location of this segment, and the months item ID 2. And this is how you will create those breakdowns. And it's make it quite hard to do, as I said, massive reporting. So be mindful of that. There is normally actually a complete. So if you go to the Adobe 2.0 API reporting multiple breakdown, there is a full GitHub page going through that exact example. I mean, not that exact example, but they take the day and the page. I took the months. You can read that. You can see that, as I was explaining in that request, they actually get the page, and they in their metric, which is here page view and visit. So they took two metrics. they didn't put a segment on top. So they have one filter. And for each metric, you can see that you referencing the filter that it needs to be used, So here the filter 0 and here the filter 1. And the filter 0 is the breakdown by the item ID. So date range here, the item, yeah, this one. And ID1, which is used for this. You see that the filter is 1, so the ID1 is for this. Then it will be using the item ID here, which is exactly the same because they are doing a breakdown for the same elements here. At the same time, you could use it by different elements. So you can basically do a breakdown and say, I want to have this the same metric, like page views, and have it separately, and here having different filters. So one will be for let's say Monday, let's Tuesday, and so on and so on. So it gives you flexibility, but it's not that easy to build. Let's now start to see, because I'm on it, let's start to see how we can build it. So actually there is a very good video from Jen Lesser I got, and this is giving you the exact thing that I'm going to show you. At that time, it was not available of the UI, so you needed to go to the console log, or console, and then build your thing around it. Now, you can actually, I think in the help section, you can enable the debugger, and this debugger will show you the XML and JavaScript code behind each request in Analytics Workspace, and you can say that. Okay, you need to reload that page. Now I'm reloading that page. And this is the preferred way that you are going to build your template of request. Because it's, as you can see, it's quite hard to do all of those array, especially if you're using a filter and segment. Then it's quite hard. But here, let's imagine I'm doing a page, and occurrences is good for me. Then what my previous change on the help and the debugger give me is that I have now this little bug here, and I can click on this, and I can look at the freeform table, and I'm looking, okay, this is what I've done right now. And I can actually get the whole copy to clipboard JSON element, and I have things here ready to open it. And you can see that I get this, my report suite, I get my date range, my metric is occurrences, and my variable is page. I have different setting applied, and so on. So this will help you create your request. We will see that again, when I'm really touching the Adobe API with Python. But at least it gives you the idea if you want to start right now doing this before watching any other videos. Okay, so we started with the hardcode stuff, I would say. But I think this was the most interesting element of anyone watching this video. If not, sorry that you have to watch all of this. Now we will go to a more easy part, where it's more about the reporting of the analytics account itself. So the analytics account itself can have multiple information, useful information that you can use. So one of the main questions I have, because the 2.0 and is not in par with the 1.4 API before, and everyone asking me, oh, actually the reporting is worst, I cannot access all the data that I wanted than before. What this 2.0 API is useful for. It's useful for a couple of things already, and it will be useful for more and more things in the future. We'll see that. But already we can build a lot of elements on top of that. So you could get all of your calculated metrics already. You could get all of your collection. Oh, and by the way, I am now in the Swagger. So I already mentioned that briefly, that there is a Swagger UI. So you can click on that, and the documentation are right here. And the reporting API gives you all of that. So the collection is your different report suite. So you can get all of your report suite when you have large account and you don't know how many reports you have and the different setting attached to them. It can be quite useful. You can have the tags that are being used, date range that are being used, and the most interesting things are the dimensions. So it returns the list of dimensions for a given report suite. So that's a very important element. And, the metrics, the reports is actually the one that you are going to use for running the report that we would just discuss. The segments and the user. So already with all of that, we can have a quick look and the reporting that you will have hard time to find, except if you're with the Adobe Customer Success Manager can give you that element on a monthly basis, most likely. Here you can directly self-serve this information for yourself and build your own information from this. The most useful one that I found are the segments. This is very important, also for at least for me, because you want to have a quick look at the segment, and the most important element of the segment is that you can get. I don't know if I'm going to see it in the element. You will get the definition of the segment. So technically, what you could do is that you can run through all of your segments and compare them to each other and find the one that are similar and saying, okay, I have so many duplicated segments used at the moment, so I need to look at that definition and try to build an official segment for your company, because I see that 100 people are having the same segment. It makes no sense. Use an official one. You can also find that you can see that you have the owner. You can find who is actually using which segment, so it makes a lot of reporting on that very easy. And you can also edit the segment in a scalable way, because the API enables you to actually update the segment if you want. And then in that case, you can change the ownership or things like this, or change the definition, or change the title if you have a naming convention that is not being applied to your company or firm. It's a very interesting way to enforce this kind of naming convention or taxonomy that you're using. The user is very nice. Calculating metrics is the same, but definitely already with that, if all of the company that I know were doing this kind of checkup, it will already be super useful. So we'll go through that on the next video. So everything except the report. The report is for another video, so the next video, because as I already provided, is that it can be quite complex, and as I'm going to explain, Python and most probably Panda and the API itself, then it's going to be too long for a video encapsulating everything. Now, I'm more going to a perspective view. So if you want to go to the next video, you can now. This is my piece by 2 cents on this API now that is going to be discussed. And one thing is that, as you can see now, we can post report, but we cannot get reports. So I'm pretty sure that at some point, that's my only idea, you will have access to the report that are being created. So a report at the moment is one table, one free form. And this is like the whole, as you can see, the whole thing, that if I have multiple reports, is a project. And at the moment, this element is not available, so you could not actually monitor your project or who is actually building workspace project at the moment. I'm pretty sure this will come at some point, but I have no official dates or any hint around that. But be mindful of this, because at the moment, you manage your segments, you manage your metrics or calculated metrics. Unfortunately, you cannot manage your workspace report so far, so it's still a manual task. be mindful of that. The other thing that is most likely coming, and this one I don't have a date, but I have very good clues, is that there is a data repair API and a bulk data insertion API. So briefly on data repair API, we won't cover at the moment this data repair API, but what is it doing? Is enables you to clean elements that have been retrieved by Adobe Analytics accidentally. So if you use PII information, so personal identifier information, so PII data, you will be able to clean your report suite from those information, and that is available in the future. So this is not available in 1.4. So as I said, it's very cool new stuff coming now. So this availability. Right now, I think it's only available for activity map elements. So if you add some PII data retrieved through URL string or through parameters, you will be able to clean that up. The other one, which is also very cool, is the bulk data insertion API. And you have also Swagger here. There is two elements that you can do. One is the event, is to send a CSV JZip file of 100 megabyte or less of request, and directly you send that to your report suite and they are being processed. So before that, there used to be, as I was explaining, the data insertion API. And this data insertion API is for each of the requests you send them, and this is one-to-one relationship. This new data insertion API enables you to gather all of the information, so you can imagine for an application and everything, and then you created a CSV, you JZip it, and you send that, and it's automatically being used. So it's a much more scalable in a time of how many amounts you can send to Adobe. And we will see that because I've developed my Python wrapper to take this into consideration. We will see how that actually can be used. At the same time, what I did, I also implemented the data insertion API, normal one, not the bulk, and they will actually be coming very soon in the API. So there are the two wiki pages that are not officially linked yet, but you can find them if you look at the master, about Analytics Build Data Insertion API, the user guide and the data repair API. So those elements are coming from Adobe. So we will only cover in the next video the reporting. Then we will do one for reporting like Analytics Workspace. And then we will do a data insertion API video to get you familiar on how this works. We will not cover the data repair because first, I didn't have this use case before. Second, it's now only for activity map, but it will come with more elements in the future. And at that point, I will probably do something for it. So that is all for this video. I hope it helped you understand what the Adobe Analytics API 2.0 is about and why it's the future and how it's working. Now I'll see you in the next video for the actual usage of that API with Python. Bye, guys.